I wrote a journal series on this, and the first installment will be in February. And it'll be 5 or 6 pages, whatever it is, on tuning one note. And all of this is covered in it, you know, using the fork or using the electronic tone. So you can, once you've seen it demonstrated, you can go and read about it, and it'll make sense to you. But really, all you do is once you might think that on different pianos, it's going to have a different rate of beating, and technically yes, but as a practical matter, it's not enough difference to make any difference. And the reason is because the A4 string of any piano is always going to be about the same length, and it's probably always going to have about the same size wire there. So I have found, for example, that on a Steinway D Concert Grand, I get the same inharmonicity that I got on a Yamaha P22. So there's very little difference. So on any piano, all you're listening for is this ying, 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 ying. And when you hear that, it's your signal that you've got it exactly right. So I'll go on. So now, anytime that you have a piano very out of tune, you're going to want to maybe rough it in. And there are many different temperament sequences, and maybe you were taught a fourths and fifths sequence, but it wasn't working out too well. And the reason for that is most likely that that's something you have to practice over a very long period of time for you to be able to use it well. A lot of the old timers will say that that's what they used and they passed the exam with it and so forth, and I did too. But I struggled with it for a long time. But you can use it to get everything close if it's the most familiar thing to you. But I'll show you then something else that's going to work pretty well. We're going to deal with the contiguous third, the initial set of contiguous thirds. And that may seem very difficult for a lot of people, but I'm going to try to make that easy today. So the first thing you're going to do is you're going to have A3. And I hear a beat in the octave there. And I'm just going to make a still sound out of it. So that's going to be close enough. And then your next note is going to be your F3. Now, if you say, I don't really discern rapid beats very well, you know, I can hear the fourths and fifths a lot better, but those thirds, you know, I don't know. I promise you can hear those better than the fourths and fifths, really. Because if you have a fourth and fifth that's beating, it's not right. So the beating that there is in fourths and fifths is actually very, very slight. And the difference between a fourth that's pure and one that's properly tempered is very subtle. And you can also have a fourth or fifth that's tempered the wrong way. You can have a wide fifth or a narrow fourth. And if you have either one of those, you're going to be 4 cents off. And you're going to get a lot of points, and the rest of your temperament isn't going to work out at all. So this, I'll flatten it. Maybe that'll help it. No, that made it worse. So now it's this really sour sound. So that can't be right. So that's the sound of the pure third that there was in the ancient mean tone temperament. And that's the sound that you get in the ancient mean tone temperament. It's kind of has its own beauty, but to our ears it sounds peculiar. So what you're looking for is this neither sweet nor sour. The approximate beat rate is 7 beats per second, but you can't count that. Nobody can. And it's not exactly 7 anyway. What it needs to be depends upon the scaling of the piano and then also the width of octave that you create. So if you have a wider octave, as some people are advocating these days, it's going to be faster. If you have a low inharmonicity piano, for example, it's going to be slower. So you have to find it. That's too fast. That's too slow. So we're looking for this moderate sound. Now, I can later on, I'm going to prove whether it's right or not. But at this point, I think I have it within the range that it needs to be. So I'll just tune an octave to it. Nice pure sounding octave. I don't want to hear any beats. I don't want to be a little bit wide or anything like that. That's for later. When you're trying to play around with the temperament. For the tuning exam, you want to go with this real model type of tuning. So you want a pure sounding octave. Now the C sharp. All the major thirds are 14 cents wide of where they would be if they were pure. So they all have the same quality of sound, but they all have a different rate of beating. The rate is 4 to 5, but we're not going to try to count that at this point. We're just going to compare. So there's a big difference. So I'm going to sharpen the C sharp. So I have a slower, faster. Now I can already tell that it's not exactly right, but it's still going to be close enough to get this piano closer to the point where it should be. And then, so you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 notes tuned so far. From the 3 lower notes, you can tune a 4th and a 5th. You can just estimate, it's not going to be pure, and you're going to have a little bit of beat in it, a wide 4th. And then kind of a narrow 5th, okay, and then from A, the D is a 4th, and the E is a 5th. From C sharp, you have F sharp and G sharp below it. This lilting sound is what we're looking for. Oh, okay, it was detuned, so it's a narrow 4th. So I have to flatten it past the point when it's pure to where it's wide. So now I have 9 of the notes tuned. The ones that are left are the G3, the B3, and the D sharp 4. The G3 I can tune between the C and the D above it. I can find the place where it's about equal sounding. Just try to get it about sounding the same between the two. The B, I can tune from the F sharp below it and the E above it. See, that sounds pure, but the B, E is beating. So those sound about the same. And then the D sharp from the G sharp 3 and the A sharp 3 below it. I hear a beating sound there, and I hear a beating sound there. So I don't know what it is, if it's sharp or flat or what. Now it's obviously flat. So I have about the same sound. So now I should have kind of a rough sounding temperament. All right, yeah, it doesn't sound perfect, but already it would pass the exam, and that's the deal. There's kind of an obvious bad one, and this would give you maybe a couple of points. Now, the way they score the exam is they average everything out between what you've done and the master tuning. So this will score a point, and they'll ask, well, can it be improved or by sharpening or flattening it? So they'll go and use test intervals. That sounds kind of inconclusive, you know, it sounds... All right, then, you know, I'm hearing a beat there. And I kind of hear too much of a difference in speed. So then I'm hearing a beat in the fifth, and then so that means that I could improve this. By flattening it. So that's the way that they'll score the exam. But you see there, you can take something that wouldn't be passable at all, and you can get it pretty close pretty quick. And this is what you want to do, because the piano is very out of tune. And after you've done that, then you want to give every note two or three good test blows. To make them do whatever they're going to do. And then now we start over and can really scrutinize things. So the A we already have. The A is a given, the A4. So we go to the A3. And I'm going to detune it again a little. And from the point where it's wide, the octave is a little wide, I want to narrow that octave just to the point where I hear the beat stop. You might hear a very, very slow beat. What I'm looking for is the 4/2 type octave, and what that means is that the fourth partial of A3, 1, 2, 3, 4, is coincident with the second partial of A4, 1, 2, all right? You can tune an equal temperament with a wider octave. You can tune an equal temperament with a narrower octave. But your optimum octave width at least for exam purposes, is going to be the 4/2 octave. And actually, what I believe that is that it's really the optimum size all the time. So anyway, without any more opinions about that, that's what you want to do for the exam. Okay, so that octave is good. These two notes are pretty reliable. Well, we want to test that. Sorry about that, I forgot that. The test note for the 4/2 type octave is going to be F3. Now we've already moved it into place, so it's in a good place for being a test note. Now the test note is just a reference. It hasn't been verified as being correct. It's just a point of reference. So the major third and the 10th need to sound the same. I get the idea that maybe the 10th is a little slower, which would mean that the octave is a little narrow, but I really don't think so. Let me see, we'll try it again. You can always use your sostenuto pedal. We'll do more of that later. But I'm hearing the same sound, and if you play all three together and then hold them with the sostenuto pedal, the whole thing just hangs there. If you don't have it right, like that, and you try this test note, here there's a difference. Slow, fast. No, that obviously doesn't sound like a very good octave. So I'm trying to make it a little better with knowing that it's not exactly right. All right, now when you play all three together, you hear this little slow beat emerge. That tells you that the octave is a little bit still too wide, or narrow as the case may be. So it just hangs there. So now these two notes you can consider to be very reliable. Now the next thing you want to do is estimate this F3. Well, I'm going to go ahead and make it a little bit too fast, I think, to show you that it won't work. Now again, you want to approach the octave from the wide side, so this time you want to sharpen the F4. So the test note for that would be C sharp, the major third below the bottom note. And it's a pretty convenient position. See, I'm getting a similar sound, so that's good. Now, if those were correct, if the F and A is correct, then I should be able to place the C sharp. Okay, now that's obviously wrong because the A C sharp is slower than the F and A. The ratio of contiguous thirds is 4:5. It's a small difference, okay? It's not the smallest difference that there is, but it's a small difference. And the upper third of any two contiguous thirds has to be faster than the lower by a ratio of 4:5. If it's 4:4, then there's the same, right? So it's 4:5, it's just a little bit faster, not a lot, and it's not the same either. And it's certainly not slower. And then, so if I try the next two, A, C sharp, and C sharp F. Okay, it's faster and slower, or slower and faster, but too much of a difference. So for me to get faster than that, I'm going to have to go to but then if I try the next pair, A, C sharp, and C sharp F, oh, that doesn't work, because this is now almost pure. Very slow beat. And the last pair, C sharp, F, and F4, A4, it's wildly different. The top third is so wide that it beats so fast that you can't really even discern the beats. I can barely hear them, but they're certainly past the point of trying to count them or compare them to anything else. It's just this kind of sour sound. Sound like a horn honking or something. So it's too fast. So if the top interval is too fast, then it means the bottom interval is too fast. So we got to fix that. So I fixed it, but now I know that I've made it too slow, but I will show you what happens there. Getting the same sound, right? Now there's too much difference. Okay, but then if I try the next pair, wow, way too much difference. And then the next pair, the top interval beats slower than the one below it. So that means that the top interval is too slow. So if the top interval is too slow, it means the bottom interval is too slow. So I need to find that magic spot. So I'm just guessing at it. I'm not trying to count the beats or anything. I'm just kind of going with my gut feeling about it. And eventually I'll either prove or disprove it. So now we'll do this again, tune the F4 to it. Still too wide. We can pull this up a little bit. You need to have it rapid, but not too rapid, but not too slow either, because if it's too slow, you might not be able to tell the difference. I think I'm hearing a slower and faster there. then I have this nice still sound that I've approached from the wide side just until I've closed the octave enough that it doesn't beat anymore. And I'm getting that same sound. If I play them all three together, it just hangs there, and I'm not getting this kind of swell out of it or anything. And that's exactly what I want. Sostenuto pedal is great for that. All right, now let me see if I can put the C sharp where it belongs. So that's too slow. And then that's too much of a difference. So that indicates that the C sharp needs to be raised. Now they're about the same. Even a little bit slower still. That might be too much. Maybe not. Now it's fitting the description of what it is supposed to be, ultimately. You need to have 2 octaves of the same quality that you use the test note with. And then you need to have, starting with F and A at around 7 beats per second, but not counting them, just this certain rate that you've come up with. Slower, faster, faster yet, and then very fast. At the limit, at or near the limit of discernibility. We don't ultimately listen to thirds up here. They're too fast. But when you're doing this initial set of contiguous thirds, that's about the only time that you would make this comparison. Now you can start at the top, very fast. It is about 14 to 15 beats per second. Very fast, slower, slower, and slower yet, all right? So up until not too long ago, I thought that's the best you can do to start off with. But we're at 7:30. Let's see. We're going till 9 o'clock here, right? Yeah, okay. I see 7:30. I've been an hour at it so far. Thank you. The guy was telling me about the time. I did want to say that I spend the most time on the first note, and then the temperament octave, and then the mid-range, and then the rest of it flows much more quickly. So now there is a way to prove that that initial chain of contiguous thirds is right or not. Now I'll try to do that as quickly as I can. From the F3, you tune the A sharp or B flat as a pure fourth. No beats, pure. And the test for that is going to be the C sharp below it. Test for a pure fourth is the major third below the bottom note. Played all together, they hang, it just hangs there, all right? And then from the C sharp, you tune the F sharp below it as a pure fifth. And the test note for that is going to be the note that makes it a minor chord, or the note that's a major third below the top note of the interval. just hangs there. Now, if you hear the proper progression, it means that your initial chain of contiguous thirds is correct. Now you have to make sure that this is exactly pure. And, right? And what I hear is that it beats, but it doesn't quite progress. It's about the same. So what that means is that the initial F, this is still a little bit too slow. So what I need to do is go back to that, and about the smallest difference that you can make, that you would see like a 1 cent on your electronic tuning device, is what you need to change that by. And then go back over that entire thing. Now the C sharp, I need to raise it just a little bit. Okay, now let me try this. Actually, I did it, I'm backwards here. I don't do this every day, believe me. I'm an electronic tuner. If the test interval was about the same as, if the F sharp, A sharp was about the same, it meant that the F and the A was too fast, not too slow. So I needed to slow it down. Find that sweet spot. Find the C sharp. Sometimes when you're manipulating these notes around a little bit, the C sharp will be in the right place, but usually you have to move it a little bit. I moved the Fs a little bit sharper, so I'm going to have to move the C sharp too. Now the test notes. Now I'm getting what I'm looking for. I'm getting a progression. Now here is the smallest difference that you would find in tempering. It's a 15 to 16 ratio. So now I know that my initial chain of contiguous thirds is 100% correct. So now we go right into the temperament sequence that I recommend called up a third, down a fifth. Now, we're not pulling thirds out of thin air. That tells you the next note that you're going to tune. So your first up of the third was the F and A C sharp. So from C sharp, you're down a fifth. Okay, we know that we already tuned that temporarily as a pure interval. So I'm just going to sharpen it a little bit. I'm just going to ruin it a little bit. I don't want a beating fifth. And I don't want it right next to being pure either. I just want a dirty, slightly dirty sound, as they say. Now, the checks for that, then you can use this check for the pure fifth again. But instead of getting the same sound from each interval, the minor third now will be faster than the major third. Which it is. And this minor third will also be very similar to the C sharp and F above it. Still a tiny bit faster than it, but very similar to it. So these two tests tell you that it's at least in the right area that it needs to be. May not be absolutely perfect yet, but it's very close at least. Now, up a third from F sharp would be the A sharp. We know that it's already a pure fourth, so I'm going to sharpen it. Now, the fourth and the fifth have essentially the same character. They're both 2-cent temper intervals. The fourth is really the inverse of the fifth. And so right for this particular note, you can use the F4 as a check. But the fourth, because tempering is logarithmic rather than linear, the fourth has a slightly more pronounced sound, or in other words, the beating is a little bit faster. But it's not a beating fourth and a pure fifth. That's not what you're looking for. Just very similar sound. But now this fourth then will sound very much like another fourth that I've already created. If anything, maybe a little more too pronounced. So now it also creates a major third. It's not working. So I go back between these two intervals and see if there's something that I can fix. Maybe this is too tempered. This is too slow. Pull some of the tempering out of it, and I'm still getting a difference in sound, but maybe that's even too much. Just a shade of difference, and those two intervals are very similar. Now go back to the fourth. Can I sharpen it? That's too much. still I need something more. I can live with that. I'm almost where I need to be, and the ultimate answer is that I still need to go back to my contiguous thirds, because I can't make the next interval fast enough. What can happen is that any note can move on you by a cent, but even a half a cent is enough to throw it off. So I'll do that. See, now that fixed it, right? So, but I just need to I'm still always getting the same kind of description out of this. Slower. Slower, faster. All the time. It's just this very fine degree. Now I've got what I'm looking for. Everything's tempered, and I've got the progression I'm looking for. So now I know that I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 4, 5, 6, 7 notes that are 100% perfect. And yeah, I spent a lot of time on them so far, but they are perfect. So now everything else can be tuned to them. So I go up a third. I want to go up a third to the D4, which I can tune from A as a fourth. And I can compare it to the A4. And this fourth can be compared to this, let me see. Two similar fourths and two fifths that sound the same. Okay, and now I have another pair of thirds up here. And here, once again, I'm getting a little bit too similar. So let me see if I can sharpen D a little bit. Now, at some point, you can actually tune a third. When you're close enough to where you want it to be, you can compare that third to another one. Now that's the sound I want to hear, but that's not the sound I want to hear. So let's see if I can make a compromise between those two. Getting there. Oh, brother. You know what happens is that F does not want to stay where I put it. Now that's the right sound. And can I sharpen the D a little bit? There's it, that 15:16 ratio. Okay, so now I've up a third, down a fifth to G3. I make a tempered fifth that sounds like ones before it. And the minor third that it creates. Now you may think that you don't listen to minor thirds, but in this area of the piano, from C3 to C4, they're very useful. They're the same range of beating as what you hear thirds a little bit higher than that, so you can hear them. Just remember that they are narrowed intervals. So the narrower it is, the faster that it beats. The wider it is, the slower. So these two purr like kittens. They're just perfect. So that G is probably right, up a third. Now that sounds too slow. Oop. I want to tune not a third, but I want to tune the B from the F sharp below it. So I want that fourth to sound like the others. Here we go. So now I have another major third. I'm getting a nice progression. Still, I'm thinking that this third is a little bit too slow, but I'm going to move on from there for right now. Up a third to D sharp, which I can tune from the A sharp below it. Sounds pretty good. Similar sound to other fourths. So that creates another major third. Oops. That can't be right. So we'll see what, it was probably a narrowed fourth. So these two fourths sound good, and so you see a narrowed fourth can really fool you, and it can be very, very wrong. So all my fourths sound alike. So now I can go down a fifth to G sharp. And I hear a tempered sound, but I can't trust it. I don't know whether it's wide or narrow, so I have to find out. That's definitely wide now. Pure. So as I'm getting that same kind of sound from each one, creates another minor third. So now it sounds pretty good, but it is maybe a little bit too slow. But in order to make the minor third faster, I have to narrow it, not widen it. So that sounds good. So let me try it with the note that I tuned it from. Sounding close to pure, but still has that tempered sound, so I'll buy that. Up a third. Now your C, most other sequences, the C is going to be one of the first notes that you tune, and the E there too, first, second note that you tune, but in this one, those are the last. But your C now you can tune, there's 4 different notes that you can tune it from. Only this fourth sounds a little bad, so means that the C still needs to come up a little bit. Three different notes that you can tune it from, not 4. But that creates a major third again. Unfortunately, that sounds a little fast. So now I need to make some kind of compromise between this and unless my F, let me check that F again against F3. Those two sound pure. my fourths and fifths sound good. And now my major thirds sound good. So now we go to the last note of the temperament section. And again, you can tune it from 3 or 4 notes. And it's sounding good as a fourth or fifth from all of those. Let's see what about the thirds. All right, now I have the temperament section completed. And at a master tuning, the examiners will pore over this even more to try to get it more perfect. But I can tell you from my experience as an examiner, this is already at 100% level. I find only a little bit of a problem with the sixth there that I could maybe do something about. But time is not infinite, so you have to move on from that at some point. Once you get the basic description, all your fourths and fifths sound even, and your thirds and your sixths progress fairly nicely, and you have contiguous thirds, and you have 2 pairs of octaves. You are way up there with something that's going to pass at 98 or 100. Now, I'm done with temperament, and the mid-range is next. Do you think there's any time for any questions, or are there any questions?
A lot of questions have been answered in the chat as we've been going on. Does anybody have any questions relevant to what we've been doing right now? I'm looking, so plug them in right now. Right, thanks Joshua for putting that in for the YouTube videos that you've got for Bill. Bill, yes, one of the questions that, what is the, I'm, without pulling out my manual, what is the tolerance for measuring A4 at 440, A440? Is it 0.03 cents?
All these tolerances are basically 1 cent. Now for the initial A, it is 1 full cent. You're allowed up to 1.0 cents off, either flat or sharp, before you get a point off. All these other notes, the tolerance is actually 0.9. So anytime if you hear, let me go to this next note and let me show you. See, I made that pure. I can't quite do it, but if I make a pure fifth and a fourth that beats kind of prominently, there you're right there at that threshold of that
right.
of a point off. And if it scores and the examiners listen to it, the question is, can it be improved by sharpening and flattening? And the answer will be, well, yes. The fourth sounds fine, the fifth sounds too pure and the fourth sounds, and then the major third sound a little too fast and all that. So yes, we can get that better. That's a 1-point error right there. So I hope maybe that helps understanding with some people. So let me move on. Now for the rest of the mid-range, I've seen a lot of people do fairly well with temperament, but then in the mid-range they get enough errors that they don't pass. And I've never understood this because it's really just an extension of what you've done. And you need to spend a lot of time on your temperament, but you need to watch your clock and reserve enough time for the mid-range. But let's say that you're running out of time. These notes are all going to be detuned. So you want to make octaves. That octave sounds okay. See, now all of those few notes there were all much better than they were. They would have gotten points off if you didn't do that. So you're already, even if they're not exactly right there, you're much better than if you hadn't done anything. And then above, so you can't leave that. That's a 2-point error right there. This is obviously very bad. That's where I had my tuning pin my tuning hammer on the wrong pin. Now your A you have done, so you leave that alone. And then B4 is the last note in the mid-range. So you're just looking for these pure sounding octaves. And then give them all a rap. Oops, don't want to bug the A. And then go back to it again. Now you can try your fourths and fifths. So there I have a pure fifth and a beating fourth. I'm looking for basically the same sound in each of those between the fourth, fifth, and octave. None of them are completely pure, but they're never tempered enough to have a beating sound. And it kind of proves that an octave can sound good over kind of a range of being a little narrow, right, dead center, or a little bit wide. That sounds good. Fourths and fifths sound good, and octaves sound good. So now go to the notes above the temperament octave. As you get higher on the piano, your fourths do start to speed up a little bit, and the fifths start to slow down. So that happens, but still is within this controlled range. You your octave can be your final judge. You don't want a beating octave. Narrow fifth. Okay, those now they're better than they were before, and they're probably within a range that they wouldn't get any points off. But you can still refine with rapidly beating intervals, thirds, sixths, major thirds, minor thirds, and major sixths. What I hear right there is a little bit third that's fast. If I try contiguous thirds with it, I get faster, slower. That's wrong. So if I go back to the fourth, probably what happened is that the note slipped on me a little bit. Sounds good as an octave. Sounds good as a fifth. Sounds good as a fourth. So now let me try the third again. All right, now the minor thirds are even a finer degree of refinement, actually. And they're good up to about C4. And your major sixths. So all of those just purring like kittens, they're well within the margin, the tolerance of the exam. Now we can check the above the temperament octave. Now sixths are good at this point. And tenths. What I hear is a slightly slow one here. So let's check back with fourths and fifths. Not much that I can do about it. So if that tenth is slow, maybe the E flat or D sharp below it is a little sharper. This one is a little fast, really. And so is that fourth that goes wang, wang, wang. All right, so now I have completed part one, and everything is within a range that it would get 100%. So if there are any questions, I'll answer. Otherwise, I'll go on. I don't really need a break at this point. So, and we have, we're at 8:13, and so there's essentially 45 minutes maximum left. But let me see if I can.
Bill, there is a question in here that, and it all has to do primarily with the scoring. And I think there's some, you might want to elaborate a little bit on how things are scored against the master tuning.
Okay.
I think that's with the.
Okay. I will.
And the offsets and how things are adjusted according to where people put their pitch. And how that's
pretty
done
good
in
question.
relation to, so that there's an understanding between there's a master tuning on the piano, and then how their tuning then relates to that.
All right, the master tuning, first of all, is set up by a committee. There's somebody like me who tunes the piano the best that he can, just the way that I've been doing right here. And two other guys come in, or two other people, let me put it that way. I don't want to, can certainly be women, come in, and we scrutinize everything. We start right at the beginning and check these two octaves and this initial chain of contiguous thirds. Is that right? Or could we fix that a little bit? And we make very small corrections. Sometimes or actually these days, what they often do is they'll use an electronic tuning program, and somebody will tune the piano with that first. And while the results are usually good enough in most circumstances, as for the ultimate scrutiny, though, we can always find small corrections that we can make. The electronic tuning program is always an algorithm that's based upon assumptions that it cannot see little flaws or changes in the scale, that we compensate for by ear. So now this master tuning usually takes and just with the piano muted off and the middle strings only sounding, it still takes us 4 hours to do it. So if it seems like I've spent a lot of time doing what I've done so far, the examiners take much more time than that. Okay, so they set up this ultra model tuning that's beyond what any single human being could do, because we want to have this perfect model. Okay, then when the examinee comes in and tunes the piano, or when that's done, that tuning, we play each note of it, and we find exactly where it is on the electronic tuning device, and we record it there, and that creates the master tuning. And if you ever looked at the figures, they don't, there's no particular pattern to them, except that they go from negative numbers up to positive numbers, and kind of in more or less a smooth pattern, but not really the same as electronic tuning program, that the only thing it can do is kind of create this kind of smooth scale, whereas the piano itself really is a little bit irregular. So anyway, somebody comes and tunes the piano, like say I was doing it, I wanted to find out where I am now. And my results would never would and never could exactly match what the master tuning is. The initial pitch, even if I got it perfect, everything else is going to be just a tiny bit different. But let's say that you passed with your pitch, but you were like me at first when I used the tuning fork with the test note F2. I was off by more than 2 cents. Okay, now if if the tolerance in the middle of the piano is 0.9 cents, there's a larger tolerance the further that you get out. But if it's 0.9 cents, that would mean that I'd have an error on every note. So there is an algorithm that is used that averages the results of the examinee's tuning. The examinee tunes the piano, and we carefully measure each note, the results of each note, and we put that in the tuning device. And there's a way to do it by hand. We all have to know how to do this by hand. It's an algebra problem, really. But the electronic tuning device has a program in there that does it instantly. And what it does, if your pitch is a little bit higher, it matches it the best that it can to the master tuning, or if it's lower, it brings it up. And we call that a pitch correction number. So it moves the two the closest that it can. And there's still going to be differences. And when there's a difference that goes beyond the tolerance, a point is scored. Or if it goes more than 2 times the tolerance, 2 points is scored, 3 points and 4 points, and so on. So in the temperament octave, the tolerance is 0.9 cents. So if you have a note that's 1 cent off from where it should be, you'll get a point. Now, sometimes with the averaging of the two, this really shouldn't be an error, just turns out it's scored as one anyway. The examiners listen to what is scored as an error, and the question is always, can that note be improved by either sharpening or flattening? And sometimes you try various tests for it, and the answer is, well, no. If I flattened it, it would make it worse, and if I sharpened it, it would make it worse. So it's really about the best that can be, right where it is, and then that point off gets nullified that way. That doesn't happen too often, but it does. Just about everybody's exam may have 1 or 2 notes nullified in it, for that reason. But usually, if there's a point scored, it is verified orally. There's no points off that really aren't able to be verified. The examiners don't necessarily examine each point off if there's a whole lot of them, and we verify two or three of the larger ones, and it's already below passing and all that. We don't really try to scrutinize everything. If you have a page full of errors and all that, the exam has failed. That's all there is to it, because it means that everything's all over the place. That sometimes some things agree and other things don't. It's not a description of what I just did. You're not. If you play the intervals on that piano, you're going to find unevenness all over the place. You're not going to find what it is that I showed you just now. So I hope that answers that question.